Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Historia Politica Publica. This is a series of episodes about Alan Moore and some of his works. Alan Moore is one of the graphic novel writers best known around the world. He was raised in Northampton in the UK and he has written extensively about fiction and also about book of non-fiction, most of them about history. He has a great knowledge about political theory, philosophy, history, and other arts. Although his bibliography is huge, I will dedicate the next episode to talk about Watchmen, V for Vendetta, and if there is some time left, I would like to talk about Promethea, which is a graphic novel that I found very interesting. Has fantasy genre, but it also touches some themes that are pertinent for our society. I would like to analyze Moore's philosophy and how his thought is implemented in his different works. Obviously, Watchmen and V for Vendetta are the most famous. So I will try to explain how this philosophy of anarchism has influenced his works. Yes, as I mentioned, for those who don't know about the thought of Alan Moore, he considers himself as an anarchist. During an interview with Honest Publishing in 2011, he remarked that, quote, "As an anarchist, I believe that power should be given to the people whose lives this is actually affecting." Speaking on the aftermath of Occupy Wall Street, the movement that happened in summer in the United States, the pronoun this refers to the crisis suffered by the majority of people, which was exacerbated after the economic crisis of 2007-2008. So for that reason, Moore believed that power shall reside in the people, but not in a kind of symbolic or presidential style, democratic representative elected people, but rather of people organizing themselves in order to carry on with different ideas of society. And this follows the ideas of famous anarchists such as Emma Goldman, Bakunin, Proudhon, or Kropotkin, pointing out that those who have the power, quote, have no moral authority, as they are enriching themselves in striking contrast with the lowering on people's life standard. Moore echoes other anarchists like Noam Chomsky, Joseph Proudhon, Godwin, or the Anonymous Group. He also, this idea which is shared by them is something like, quote, "Power that isn't really justified by the will of the governed should be dismantled." Noam Chomsky, the long-time activist, linguistic philosopher, author of many books, he always remarks this idea. He considers himself also as an anarchist, and he believes that all the power that cannot be justified should be dismantled. What does it mean? Okay, Chomsky gives very good examples to understand this idea. For example, he says, if you think about the road lines, like you see that the colors are changing from green to yellow to red. When there is red, you cannot pass, and when it's green, you can do. Obviously, Chomsky says, yes, we could discuss about if it would be better to do the opposite, but I mean, we can all agree that this is a common, a sensical solution, right? Like red, you cannot pass and so on, because we have been taught since we were kids, and it doesn't really make a difference. So this is a law that perhaps has been imposed upon us, but it can justify itself. This is something to prevent accident. Okay, it's fine. But also Chomsky points, if there are some laws that we believe that do not help us, we should vote, we should organize in order to change that laws. And we see, for example, in the UK, the laws that are not letting refugees come to the country, the laws that are permitting the police use sheer force in order to crush the demonstrations. Also the law to increase the taxes for the poor people who are just making people having less resources and so on. So, obviously, when these anarchists that I just mentioned believe speak about the will of the governed, they do not mean to create a general will in the Rousseauian sense, as the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau mentioned this idea of the general will in order to create a common idea of what is good and what is bad. Anarchism, on the contrary, they give more importance to individual. The individuals are not atomized, as in Rousseau's ideas, but rather are people who want to learn by themselves, but also engaging with the community in order to put their knowledge and their help to the into the whole community. So is anarchism is this idea of everybody has a responsibility within the society, but in order to carry the goals, it is very important to organize with everybody else. So this idea follows more Bakunin's premise to organize together to seek different solutions to the problems that are constantly appearing. Obviously, Bakunin in his essay God and the State, that I will speak about it in another episode because it's huge of incredible ideas, insights about how the society can go forward, neither bonding itself with the divine right, but also with the kind of science which just tells us what to do without being open to debate. So the solutions are not going to be definite ever because society is changing constantly. The material conditions are not the same as they were like some decades before. So the idea of the impermanence, which is very inherent in Buddhist thought, relates perfectly with this current of anarchism in explaining how the path will never be straightforward and visible, and it will never be constant, but it will be shifting all the time. So we need to be prepared for that, and we need to keep looking for different solutions. Going back to Alan Moore, he offers a kind of idea, a kind of thinking about the problems that we are experiencing in our contemporary society, which is, quote, change the currency, end quote. The idea to change the currency is to empower people who have been left behind by the approach of the big companies, especially in the after the crisis of 2007, 2008. Now we can relate with the crisis of COVID-19, the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, the inflation in different countries in which not everybody is getting poor in the same level, but rather there are a bunch of people who are getting richer. So for Alan Moore, the idea is, okay, change the currency or behead the currency, as he said. Those ideas of Alan Moore are exposed in some TV shows which are really interesting to watch: Mr. Robot and La Casa de Papel, Money Heist. Mr. Robot speaks about a group of hackers, anarchist hackers, who basically what they want to do is eliminate all the debt in the world which is under the hands of a big company. So basically Mr. Robot says something like, okay, if they have 80% of the economic resources of the world and we delete this debt in their big data, in the data system, we will create the biggest redistribution of wealth in the history of humanity. And the TV show, I think, is very interesting to understand how this anonymous group is working, how anarchism can be used in the 21st century to create an egalitarian society. And Money Heist, it is also about robbing a bank, although this follows more a kind of individual desire, but I just point Money Heist for the discourse, the speech that the professor gives, in which he says, okay, during the crisis of 2008, the banks in Europe, they print paper in order to do not let the banks of every country to being bankrupt. So yes, I think it was the monetary bank, just basically what it did is give them currency at the same time when people were being told to pay more taxes in order to save the crisis that had been provoked by capitalism. So, all these ideas more depicting Watchmen, V for Vendetta, and Promethea. But surrealism in V for Vendetta, where anarchism occupied the whole narrative and the philosophy of V, the main character in the story. Basically, the narrative starts when we are in a kind of dystopian future in which the United Kingdom has befallen under the dark depths of a fascist dictatorship. There are cameras everywhere looking for the movement of the people. There is curfew. There are people who are being imprisoned and experimented in laboratories, especially those which are considered as undesirables, mostly the activists that they want to fight against the fascist dictatorship. So the resistance has been weakened through the state force, and the fathers of Eve, who will meet V during the story, were in prison and probably killed for being activists and being deeply committed to try to change the society. The atmosphere of the whole story in V for Vendetta is one of fear, of silence, where nobody seems to have neither the energy or the commitment to make a revolution. This has happened in the 20th centuries in many dictatorships such as Spain, Germany, Italy, also in Chile, in Portugal, in which there is a great resistance against the state, but obviously if the state has the means of power, they will crush no matter which movement they face. In that sense, the will of V will be make precisely a revolution and finish with the dictatorship. Although I must say that I am a big fan of the movie, which I think is absolutely brilliant, I personally recommend the graphic novel of the movie for two reasons. First of all, the philosophy of anarchism is well developed across the work. Perhaps the key moment is when Eve is doubting about the process followed to change society, about these anarchist ideas. She starts to think that anarchism is just chaos and disorder and destroying. And B explains to her very well the meaning of anarchism. He said, quote, "Anarchism means a society with order, but not following a law imposed from above." This is something related with what I mentioned earlier about Chomsky, Proudhon, and the other anarchists, where power that isn't really justified by the will of the governed should be dismantled. So yeah, this is clear. I mean, this explanation does not appear in the movie. Obviously, the movie is produced by Hollywood, so basically the great difference is that in the movie, what they say is that, okay, anarchism is basically destroying, putting bombs, and so on. And in fact, in the movie, there is one scene in which a person wearing the mask of V, which by the way has become a symbol of rebellion nowadays, you have a person entering in the store with a gun, shooting to the sky and saying anarchy or something like that, right? So this is the way that the movie in Hollywood they portray anarchism, like chaos, disorder. But in Hollywood they are very, very smart, because basically what they say is that, okay, you can justify these acts of civil disobedience, of rebellion, only if we are under a fascist dictatorship, right? So what they are indirectly and subtly implying is that because now we are living in a liberal democracy, you do not have the right to rebel against the system. No matter how non-violent you are, how you organize with the people, how many people vote for this kind of law, as long as we have the power and we are still not fascist enough for you to rebel, you should shut up. So this leads me to the other point of the graphic novel, which I consider is great in contrast with the movie, which is basically this idea that in the novel, the society has become authoritarian by a kind of slow process. So, Alan Moore shows how a democracy can be crushed in a subtle, almost invisible manner. And I think this is a powerful message here in the novel. This is something that is also touched in The Handmaid's Tale and other kind of dystopian movies. Fahrenheit 451 is really good about that. 1984 by George Orwell also tells upon the eyes of Winston Smith how society has been changing that much, which in that society people do not even remember what happened before because history has been erased. And Alan Moore takes all these influences in order to create this book. Interestingly, The Handmaid's Tale and Before Vendetta and Watchmen all were published in 1980s. So probably something was going on at that time. Margaret Atwood, writer of the book Handmaid's Tale, published her work in 1984 in a clear homage to George Orwell 1984 book, and Watchmen is based, for example, in 1985. So it's always going around that symbolic date. So, whereas in the movie, the explanation as how a society how the UK has become a dictatorship is given very quick at the beginning of the movie, when Eve is watching the TV, and also you cannot hear properly what the guy in the TV is saying, which is crazy. The guy talking is Prothero, which is like the prime minister of the time in Britain. So in just 2 minutes, basically he says that, okay, because we were defeated by the United States during 1776. These people revolt against us, and for that reason we need to fight back. So to give a bit of context about that kind of statement that Prothero gives, when we criticize implicitly the idea of the social contract as a bond created by nobody, like the Leviathan of Thomas Hobbes, as a kind of this mythical idea of the state, something which will be helpful to kind of put the mass of people together in order to live in a society without conflict, or by consent of the elites, such as the founding fathers in the United States. So for me, it is not a coincidence that V for Vendetta, speaking about this idea of creating the law from below, it is you can relate it with Thomas Hobbes, the British, and the founding fathers of the UK, because precisely it's in V for Vendetta where the Anglo-Saxon relation between both countries is fundamental to the story. And it is precisely the demonization of the United States that the leader, the already mentioned Prothero, uses to legitimate the authoritarian tradition of the British government. Mentioning the Tea Party in Boston of 1773, just to give a bit big synthesis, that happened in November 1773. There's a small accident occurred in Boston Harbor when an East Indian Company ship was delivering a cargo of tea with which the governor's sons intended to break the boycott against the remaining tax. While thousands protest on the shore, 100 activists dressed as Native Americans board the ship and threw the tea overboard. That was like the spark which started the revolution against the British Empire, and in 1776, just three years later, the United States became independent, or at least the 13 colonies became independent from the UK. And the 4th of July, it is the day of independence, 4th of July of 1776, it is when United States become a nation, at least on the 13 colonies. So, and well, after we have the separation between the South and the North and so on, but perhaps this for another episode. But the idea is that Prothero is mentioning the Tea Party as a kind of something which is worth to be demonized by the British, because it was the first step to losing the empire. And this theoretically gave legitimacy to the British to impose a dictatorship. So the idea of the United States as the other, as a figure to victimize all the time, it is the excuse used for the leaders of the new dictatorship. But as I mentioned earlier, in the graphic novel, the process to explain how this society has transitioned from a democracy to a dictatorship is taken in a more subtle way. Alan Moore takes more time in subsequent pages to analyze how freedom is being gradually curtailed to avoid a revolution. Changing some laws, increasing the police force, kidnapping some groups. The majority of people do not realize that a tyranny is being built until they can only see the castle from inside, from behind the prison doors. It is precisely in the introduction, I think it's the second edition of Before Vendetta, where Alan Moore mentioned how he decided to write V for Vendetta, and this was because he was influenced by the harsh measures imposed by Margaret Thatcher's government. At that time, he recalls how there was a law against LGBTQ plus community. So Alan Moore believes, like, he says something like, I know that my kid will grow up in a society with less freedom than the one I grew up. And this is very dangerous because we are not realizing what is happening and we won't until it's too late. So the idea of Before Vendetta is a kind of reflection of the 1980s United Kingdom, but especially the most important point is how a liberal democracy can be easily diminished by little changes. And this is what happened in Before Vendetta. In the movie, obviously, we see all the fireworks, all the fight, all the heroic aspect of V, how we need to support him because under a kind of dark regime it is legitimate to do that. But Alan Moore points something which is different. I think Alan Moore mentioned how it is better to do something before it's too late than waiting until it's too late for do something radical. So for Alan Moore, it's like the idea of being aware about the changes that are occurring in our society in order to avoid a neo-fascist dictatorship. And precisely now in the United Kingdom, there have been a lot of protests in the last months. Recently, just one because the new Tory leader Rishi Sunak has imposed restriction on refugees, has also increased the use of the police force to class the demonstration. There are more than 100 of activists who are in prison. Those are ecological activists, just from organizations like Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, and so on. And The Guardian just published, I think, some days ago, a letter in which was signed by more than 100 of people, political theorists and so on. Noam Chomsky is among them, to demand the release of these people. So I will finish here Before Vendetta. I don't want to kind of delve onto it. I think it's a really good story. Both to watch the movie and read the graphic novel are very interesting. As I mentioned earlier, graphic novel better to get into the philosophy of anarchism and how a society can be little by little lose its freedom and its rights that we are taking for granted now. Whereas the movie is more spectacular. Also, the voice of V is great. The actor is Hugo Weaving. Also, the actress that the V is, I think, the best in the movie is Natalie Portman. Is brilliant actress. So, as she said in Star Wars when she performs Padme, she says something like, "This is how democracy ends, with a big clap and a lot of screams." So this can be related with Before Vendetta, and in the next episode I will go for my favorite graphic novel of Alan Moore, which is Watchmen, and if I have time, as I mentioned earlier, a bit about Promethea.